take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
Welcome to Life in Red.
Hi, everybody. Episode 10 now of the Life in Red podcast. I have my good friends Amy and Dee here. How are you?
Good. Hey.
Excellent. So this is the first in two ways for the Life in Red podcast. One is you're my first dual, my first two-person podcast, and we only have one microphone, so this is going to be interesting. Secondly, you're the first on the podcast who I have never met in person.
Oh.
Everyone else has been who I know, but now I have never met you. So this is going to be interesting. So this is like a dry conversation.
It's true.
Of meeting each other. So Amy, Dee, you are in, I would say, the music business.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Not the music business that I'm in, but even cooler, I think you're both singers / composers / all sorts of things, eh?
Yep. Conductor, singer, managers. Yep.
Keeping people in line. Yeah.
Perfect. Let's start with Amy.
Yeah.
How does one get involved with music? Because you'd think that everyone wants to be like, oh, I'm going to be the next Taylor Swift or Camila Cabello. You two both kind of went like a little more old school, and not even like the Beatles old school.
Pavarotti.
Yeah, like
Real
okay,
old
I don't even know who
That would
Pavarotti
be
is.
Renee Fleming. I think it's kind of one of those things you start to figure out in high school. Like for me, I was always into music since kindergarten, but it wasn't until high school I started to realize like I want to make this like a life. And so you start taking music classes, and then that's from there you talk with your music teacher, and if they think that you can do it, you just go for it, and next thing you know, you're in university, and I don't know, things just take a pretty serious flight very quickly. When it comes to the classical realm, a lot of people kind of know that they want to do it early on, I would say. Like a lot of musicians I know, like a lot of pianists, started playing piano at 5, and that was like their life goal since they were like a toddler. So it's one of those things you either learn early on or you learn it pretty late in the game. Mm-hmm. Like some people just kind of sang their whole life, never took lessons or anything, and then decide, I'm going to join a choir, and then a conductor can say, holy crap, you have a voice on you and you've had absolutely no training. That's amazing. And I think that's what happened with Pavarotti.
I don't know.
His career only blossomed in like his late 20s, early 30s because he just sang somewhere and someone was like, holy crap, you have a crazy, beautiful voice.
But like, I think when you think of piano or like violin, like that, okay, yeah, that's classical. But how does one discover you have like a, I guess, classical voice? Like, are you just singing one day and you're like, ah! And you're like, oh my God, that was like perfect.
No, singing classical, I think it just takes a lot more work than I think when you're singing pop styles, rock styles and stuff. Yeah, that takes commitment. It takes dedication. It takes like fine honing your own style and your own craft. But to sing classical, it means that you're singing like without amplification. It means that you're singing for much longer periods of time sometimes than singer-songwriters, pop stylists, stuff like that. Yeah. So you're learning how to use your body in a very different way than some other singers. So it's not so much that you like suddenly open your mouth and suddenly you're like, oh, okay, she's a classical singer. It's that you are willing to kind of focus in on this particular type of music and kind of dedicate yourself to it. And it's certainly not for everyone, but for the people that it's for, we're kind of obsessive.
Yeah.
I remember I dated an opera singer who's trying to get in the business.
Oh.
So I'm not going to pretend I know anything. Yeah. I really don't. But I always found it fascinating because when you said that obsession, that cued in because her life was like 95% dedicated. Like
totally.
There was like hours in the afternoon. She's like, I can't hang out. I'm practicing or something.
Oh yeah.
The I can't, I'm in rehearsal or practice is a real thing. It's a real thing.
Yeah. And I mean, I talk to my parents about this all the time, just about to be a not just classical musician. I think anyone that is living a life that's like a vocation, not so much a career, where it becomes so all-consuming. There's a lot you have to sacrifice.
Yeah.
And time with other people tends to be like the biggie.
Mm-hmm.
So you probably come close, like with other singers. Like that's like the community now.
That is
And
the
that's your
community.
life. That's your friends.
Yeah.
that's your family.
Exactly. Yes.
So, I mean, you're both singers, you're music teachers, administrators, all involved in music. So how, like, when you said you have to find new ways to use your body to hit these notes, like, what do you mean by that? Like, instead of just like when I'm singing in my car versus, or in the shower, because I do that a lot, but, or like to do this, like, professionally, like, what types of things are very different as opposed to like a normal singer?
I think I think all singers, rule number one is do it in a healthy way, because a lot of singers who have no proper training, can completely lose their voice by the time they're 30.
That's, I've raised my hand.
Yeah. Is that you?
I'm not even a singer.
Yeah. I mean, healthy singing is number one, and having to engage certain parts of the body to get the sound out properly. I've noticed, like, when I first started out singing, I would tense up, and with the proper training, I learned how to relax. So a lot of people, when they sing, a lot of tension is in the throat, and you have to learn early on that if you want to make a career out of singing, you really need to know how to approach it from a very healthy standpoint, because if you're in it for a while, that's like your shrine, basically, is your voice. And so you just have to make sure that everything is relaxed. And that was hard for me, because when you're singing such a powerful moment, you can't help but your body react in a tense way. So I think that's a challenge for a lot of people. So to overcome that and approach it from a very healthy standpoint, you'll definitely see results in the long run.
I mean, I think that because almost everyone uses their voice in some way to speak or to sing or whatever. And many of us wouldn't consider ourselves to be singers, but we sing in the shower, we sing in the car, we'd love to sing, or even just talking. We don't, it's like breathing. We don't think about it. And I think that that's the big piece, is just awareness and realizing what your body is doing, because it's freaking amazing what your body does to actually create sound, and full body engagement. That's the other big thing, is that it's not just your vocal cords that are doing the work, it's your whole body. And that's something that you see especially with opera singers, classical singers. It's the memes that you see. It's the like images of these like huge people, and tiny people can make huge sounds too. It's just about taking up space and using your whole body.
Yeah.
They'll look at each other.
Yeah, they're like, oh yeah, oh music.
Yeah.
So how do you do this professionally? Like, how does one person like make a career out of music that I would say, isn't as popular as other genres?
Yeah. And it's interesting because we have gone on to have very different paths within this small kind of niche community as well.
Is it your first career? Like, is this what you do for your job and your rent? Or do you actually have like other jobs that you do, and this is just kind of still your passion that you're trying to pursue, but you still need to make ends meet?
Yeah. That's the case for me. So I do have a full-time job that basically brings in the money, and then as of now, the choir management and arts administration that I do is voluntary, but in a way they also helped me with my professional development in terms of going to conferences and taking part in management programs. So that's kind of the trade-off in the meantime, but I know that it's a long-term goal of theirs to eventually pay me, because it does become a very taxing job at times, especially with choir management. I mean, it's kind of everything. It's HR, it's artistic vision, it's management skills, project management. It's a bit of everything. So it starts to take over your life a little bit. So I don't know. I think it's as long as you find a good balance and kind of, well, for me, I've based my life around having everything as convenient as possible in order to maintain this full-time job and do all this choir management and singing. So that's what works for me for now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm on the other side of things where I am lucky enough to be doing this as my full-time paying the bills thing. But similar to Amy, I mean, I call it putting your puzzle pieces together. Like I don't just do one thing. I have 4 paying jobs plus some other like little gigs here and there, freelance stuff. Yeah. And then there's also just singing for fun and for joy, which sometimes is really hard to fit in there when you're doing it full time. And so it's the same as Amy, just putting together all the puzzle pieces of the things that you need to do to pay the bills, but also the things that you love to do and figuring out how to make it all work. I think that whether you're getting paid for these things or not, it's still a balancing act.
100%.
Yeah, and just figuring out that balance too between like different priorities, because even though I'm doing this for a living and teaching music and conducting music and creating music for a living, I also have all kinds of extra admin stuff on the side that comes with it, and that tends to get you down, and figuring out how to prioritize within that too.
And not just that, but also planning for future projects. Like we've been in the talks about community engagement and getting more support from the city to enhance the choral experience. In Ottawa, there's actually 80 plus choirs, and it's a huge number. And our choirs are mostly centrally located, but you'll go to Canada and find out there's all these other community choirs. You go to Orleans, South Keys, but our choirs are mostly centrally located, so we know the choirs in that area. But then almost on a weekly basis, I hear of all these other new choirs or existing choirs that I didn't know were around, and it's just insane. The list just grows, and it kind of makes me sad sometimes that we don't know all of these choirs, and I'm like, this is such a huge community. Why aren't we coming together more and doing like more festivals or collabs? I think it would be amazing. So that's kind of something that Deirdre and I have been talking about for a future project, and just kind of taking the first steps and brainstorming how we can get more support from the city.
Like as a person who's outside of that scene, like, I never hear about any of this. Yeah. And I don't know if like social media kind of, even to promote things now, is actually made much worse thanks to Facebook and algorithms and stuff like that.
Yes.
Like, even myself trying to promote this podcast, it's like ridiculous.
It's really hard.
They make it really hard for that type of stuff. So like, what types of things do you think would help, as a regular person who's listening to this, like if you're interested in checking out more local classical music? Because I know a lot of people appreciate it, but it's never top of mind.
Yeah. I think the big thing for people to figure out is that it's demographically choral music and classical music is not just for an older demographic. And the people that Amy and I sing with on a regular basis are our ages. It's how we became friends, singing in choir together. And yes, there are lots of people from kind of, when they retire onwards, because they have time to put into being in choral organizations. But there are also lots of people once they leave high school and university who keep singing in choirs. They're out there. And with, the rise of social media, you just have to look a little harder. It's all there. I mean, Amy herself is doing so much work in putting choir on the map in Ottawa through Instagram and social media. But because of these algorithms, you need to start somewhere. It will come flooding in. You just need to start searching.
It's true.
And it really is about who your target audience is, right? It just by consequence, by coincidence, that the two choirs that we sing in happen to have an average age of like late 20s, early 30s. And in my main choir, Capital Chamber Choir, we are mixed, so men and women. And we have ages from 19 to, I think, 67. And a lot of people in between. We're all in different stages of our lives. So the tricky part about that is that you have to accommodate these people in these different phases. You've got the retirees who are constantly always prepared for rehearsal. And then you have people that are in the middle of their career, starting young families, traveling for work, where they try to do their best to look at the music. And you just have to accommodate them. But you also have to cater to them in the way that they are also very social media. They're really into that community still. So you have to reach through them. I also notice word of mouth communication. It's who you know. Like I do remember you mentioning that you dated an opera singer. I'm like, oh, what was her name? And I said, I definitely know that name. And then
small world.
Yeah. I'm like, I definitely know who this person is. But yeah, it's definitely a small world. So it really is like who you know and how in depth of the conversation you get into. But it's also just evolving. A lot of choirs are run by older people. Nothing wrong with that. The thing is, in any kind of music community, you have to evolve or you'll get left behind. So you have to be on top of these algorithms. You have to be on top of a strong social media marketing plan and communications. You have to reach out for donors and get grants to get your music out there. One of the main reasons why my choir, Capital Chamber Choir, started getting on the map was because we got a grant for a recording that promoted all Canadian artists, all Canadian composers, most of them local here in Ottawa. And to get that word out, started to build on the national platform with other choirs in Canada. And from there, they will share on their social medias. So yeah, it is, I would say, for non-classical or non-choral people, it is still a challenge. I just try to sell it as much as I can and share it on my page, and then they check it out. And everyone is always so curious, but I think it's just kind of pushing them without being too aggressive to like actually listen to a sample of music.
Yeah, and from the artistic side as well, there's so much that as a conductor I have to take into consideration with programming. There are these beautiful, inspiring works of art that, you know, were written hundreds of years ago and that we continue to sing because there is beauty in them and there's the same message. You know, it's still relevant today as it was hundreds of years ago when it was written. But that's a reason why a group like Capital Chamber Choir, for example, has found success with a younger audience, is focusing on works that are being written now that have been written in the past 10, 20, 30, up to 100 years. Because in the classical music world, 100 years is not that old.
No, it really isn't.
It really isn't.
That would almost be considered new in classical. Wouldn't
Yeah,
it?
yeah,
Because
it really is.
was
Yeah,
it 1918, so
Totally.
that's really
Yeah,
not that old.
Totally. So it's taking that into consideration and finding the balance between these well-loved masterworks and composers that, you know, everyone knows, but also celebrating the music that's being made now
And exposing it.
And making sure that classical music doesn't just equal old, that classical music is still being created as we speak, and it needs to be celebrated and nurtured. And so it's a lot to kind of juggle when you're talking about an art form that is hundreds and hundreds of years old.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question, because that music, I mean, to you it might still seem relevant, and you, like you said, it has the same message as maybe some music, but a lot of it's in another language because English, I guess, wasn't that predominant back in the 16th,
Doesn't
15th,
much.
17th centuries, 18th centuries.
Well, this is all European music
yeah,
too.
exactly.
Like,
So
yeah.
as one, I can hear the beauty of it, but I don't necessarily understand what they're saying. So that's one. And two, you don't have the drums, you don't have the electric guitar coming in,
Yeah.
you don't have the synth beat.
Yeah.
So I mean, you touched on it briefly, but get your both your opinions on it. Why do you think that's important for, people who are, teenagers, 20s or 30s today to have an appreciation for this music from 300, 400, 500 years ago?
Yeah, it's the root of it. This is where all the music today came from. And I think it's absolutely wonderful. It's always good to kind of show them the top tens, Mozart, Beethoven, and just really dive into it. It's so tricky, and this is actually an ongoing issue with a lot of opera companies, specifically opera companies these days, is just having really strong youth programs and youth marketing programs, because it is really hard to get people in the theater when everything is so accessible on YouTube. They have Met at the Opera, at like Cineplex that you can just go check out. It's so hard to get people off the couch and into the theater. And plus, it's not exactly the most, it's not exactly cheap, but they've tried to implement a lot of youth programs where you get discounted tickets and whatnot. But it's such a tricky thing to tackle, and that's why I say evolve or get left behind, because you have to keep reintroducing new works, new styles, and even collabs with different art forms. There's a group in Edmonton, Procoro Canada, and they also have a subgroup on the side called FEMME, FEMME. It's four singers, and they collab with a lot of other art forms like dance and visual arts. And so it kind of joins those two communities together, which doubles attendance, doubles awareness. So you just have to keep thinking of all these new ideas to capture your audience. Even in a regular choir concert, you have to think of choreography and concert design to really engage everybody. Sometimes doing a concert where everyone is just singing in two rows right in front of you, sometimes it can get pretty stagnant, and you have to change that up a little bit.
Stimulating.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
And that is the thing, is that our attention spans are so
That's bad.
short.
You can admit it. It's bad.
It is really bad. Yeah,
It's so
exactly.
short. So we, and so our choir, what we've started doing at concerts, before I get into this, you'll notice that a lot of concerts, they ask turn your cell phones off or no filming. Now, the no filming I get because of copyright and whatnot, but we encourage our audience members to take photos and tweet about it during the concert without, of course, without interrupting.
Big flash.
Yeah. The flash is the worst for us on stage. But even just people around you, as long as you're discreet, like we encourage younger audiences. I mean, anyone in the audience to live tweet, take photos, and get the word out there.
Because it's not just about promotion and getting the word out. It's audience engagement as well. That it's not an us versus them kind of feeling. That it's we're all having this experience together at the same time. How can you be a part of that?
It's so important.
It is.
Even live streaming is a big thing now. A lot of choirs are live streaming their concerts, which gets audiences not from the local community. Like we could reach choirs from all over the world that like our page and see it, and they could just plug in and listen.
You almost need like someone to go kind of mainstream or viral, I guess. Like people I think of like Lindsay Sterling, who kind of took she's a violin player, right?
Yes.
But she made it rock music.
Yeah,
and then
exactly.
when she was at Blues Fest, like just jamming out. I don't know what the thought is on the community on like someone like Il Divo, but they're what I kind of heard at opera again, and I was like, okay, like. And like I was always appreciative of music, but like I would never have them on my iPod. But now I do.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
And I remember, I guess it was 3 years ago. There was this group called, I think they're a choir group, I could be wrong, but they're called Twisted Measure, and they had the song cover of Chandelier go viral from BuzzFeed.
Yeah.
Nice.
And that got like millions of views, and then people are like, oh, this is so awesome. And then I'm thinking there, and this was a while ago, I'm like, I'm pretty sure this is pretty standard for any choir group that they're doing stuff like that. Yeah. It's just this one went viral, but like,
I mean,
you need that attention.
There's a lot of there's a big debate over that kind of stuff, over the Il Divos, the contemporary opera kind of scene, and the choirs that go viral for singing Frozen medleys or for singing, the Sia songs, for doing all that.
I'm a huge fan of Voctave too, because they do Disney
covers.
Totally.
And
I'm so down for that every time.
Yeah. So there's definitely some kind of there's one perspective of that, by having the bigger community see choral music as the Disney covers and things like that, that it takes away from the quote unquote real classical music. I'm not of that opinion. I don't think Amy's of that opinion either. It's for me, Amy already talked about audiences, audience retention, things like that. For me, as a music educator, it's about actual interaction and engagement and getting people just singing. And at the end of the day, that's what I care about, is people singing and singing together, because there's so many reasons why singing together is a really beneficial thing for you physically and emotionally and mentally. And if that means that it's a bunch of people playing around with Snapchat filters while they're singing Disney songs together, great. If that means that you're going to join a choir and sing the Verdi Requiem, fantastic. If that means that you're going to go in a direction that Amy and I did, getting music degrees and really studying it as an art form and dedicating a large portion of our lives to it, fantastic. If it means that you sing your kids lullabies at night, great. Like, it really, to me, it doesn't matter. The labels of it don't matter. And I think that we're doing ourselves a disservice if we think that music should be kept in all of these little boxes, and that choral music should just be a classical thing, or that choral music for, teenage groups, high school choirs, that should be one thing that adults never do. Like, I think that there should be more crossover. I think that it only helps us.
Yeah.
I think that's a problem of life in general, right? It's
Yeah,
conservative versus liberal. It's,
I know.
You see it in everything, right? It's,
totally.
All the way is better. We need to keep it like this.
Yeah.
No diversity, no coming together. Sports are like that too.
Black and white.
You have the old people who want hockey, no fighting, all that stuff, right? It's.
I think a big thing with all these big groups, like you get Pentatonics and Voctave, like
I love them.
They're amazing. But you know what? I think it's also really beautiful what they're doing, because they invoke a sense of familiarity.
Yes, yeah.
Amongst
totally
audiences that listen to mainstream music, and it brings memories and nostalgia, and they can identify with that. Whereas if you ask someone, come see Verdi Requiem, where they've never heard it before, there's like that kind of gap of like unfamiliarity that's a little intimidating to them. And so that is what we have to work on, is closing that gap and telling them that it's okay. You can go to a concert wearing jeans. No one's going to yell at you. There's going to be subtitles so you can follow along. Like, it's all these things that are a little bit intimidating, that I completely understand. So we have to be very mindful of that and be flexible to that.
It should definitely be, you're going to do a choir of Taylor Swift's Red album. But then you throw in the, Mozart and the Beethoven's in the middle, and you're just like, we're just going to do a couple songs, and then like everyone's dancing Taylor Swift, you get into that, and you get back into Taylor Swift as an interlude.
But I mean, this is the type of thing, you're laughing, but it's so legitimate. And I mean, it works backwards too. I mean, the NAC, just like other orchestras across North America, it works the opposite, where people only want to go see the Beethoven symphonies, the Brahms Requiem. They only want to go see these big
Top tens.
And they're not interested in hearing the more contemporary classical works that composers are putting out. It freaks them out to not have that familiarity. So even for classical audiences, the same thing goes, is kind of baby steps and teaching people how to appreciate music that they're not used to. It's kind of an art form in itself.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. They have standalone programs on audience development because it's such a huge task to tackle. I mean, first of all, you have to recognize who is your demographic, who is your target audience. That is the first step, and then you go from there. And you have to stick with your mandate as well. So like CCC, aka Capital Chamber Choir's mandate is to promote classical contemporary music with focus on Canadian composers. But we also, we push the boundaries too, where we found ourselves performing a lot of pieces from Baltic countries as well. That is insanely beautiful. It works within our kind of singing, and like you get a lot of symphonic choruses that are really good for more powerful top 10 pieces by Beethoven and Mozart, whereas you get certain choirs that kind of have like this I want to say straight tone, but straight tone is basically where you sing with no spinning vibrato or no. Oh my God, how do I explain this to non-classical musicians? Like I basically want to say like our soprano singing with straight tone with barely any color added. So saying that to a non-classical person is like, what the hell does that mean? What do you mean color? Like blue? Like sing like blue? I'm like, no. Yeah, it's really hard to explain it. Like it's a whole. Like what you just witnessed was a whole different language as well to get to understand.
Yeah, it's teaching people that opera and choral singing and stuff. It's not the like big woman with the Viking hat on kind of thing. Yeah. Like it's not that image that there's.
I mean, not to be offensive, but the fat lady, right? It's
right? Like that's the thing.
Yes.
That's the thing. And there's reasons why those images, have stuck with this idea. But it's moving away from that. Just as pop and rock and folk, there's so many subcategories within those and different styles and different sounds. It's the same thing with classical music. It's the same thing with choral music, which is why I think it's legitimate to say that, a bunch of teenagers singing Disney songs together it's as legitimate to say that they're a choral group as it is a professional organization singing a 2-hour-long requiem,
Yeah.
One thing I definitely, when I bring people on the podcast, I want to also show, like, help people understand, like, what goes into what they do. Because, like, I had my friend who was a nurse, and not everyone understands what a nurse does. Or even, like, a radio announcer. It's not just taking on a microphone. And I'm going to bring up the girl I dated again, because she would travel to New York City just for lessons.
Yep.
She would go away for certain months in the summer to go to camps.
At her own expense,
Yeah,
too.
exactly. What people don't understand is, you said there's grants, but, like, while it may not seem popular to people who aren't in it, this is extremely competitive.
Yes.
I didn't understand.
an
I was like, what
understatement.
do you mean? Like, I don't understand. Like, I went to Montreal a couple of times with her because, Ottawa doesn't have the greatest scene, I guess. I could be wrong, but just, and like I said, the amount of time they put into it, not to learn another language, to understand, because again, what you guys could definitely attest to this, that when you're up there singing, you're as a character. And that's something I didn't understand, that you have to, it's like acting. You need to be into a character and understand a different language and what they're saying and why they're saying it and portray this. I'm like, just like going into it, I'm like, but don't you just sing on a stage and get paid? I don't get it.
in opera alone, I would say is such a grandiose art form, because you have acting, you have singing, you have dancing on occasion, choreography, you've got design, like you've got costumes and makeup on, like it is, and then you've got the orchestra backing you up, or the piano. It is so many art forms put into one, and you have to think of all those things. It's a lot of pressure, and yeah, you have to travel to these auditions, and that's what comes with trying to get a spot, especially in the opera world. It's expensive. It's expensive to travel. Most times, you have to pay like a pianist or accompanist fee on top of that, and there's a lot of entrance fees that are non-refundable that are like $500. Like, it's a lot of money.
Just for the application,
yep,
basically.
yeah, exactly. Just to apply, and then there's additional cost to getting the audition. It's crazy, but if you really, really want to get your foot in the door and you've got the talent to back it up, then go for it.
And I mean, that's on top of the expectation that you have at least an undergrad and graduate degree in singing, that your parents have been paying for lessons for you since you were a kid. It's like I said, a vocation versus a career. Like, it is a much bigger picture. I think the other piece that people don't really think about is how difficult it is from a mental and emotional standpoint. When you're dealing with such constant high levels of not just competition, but everyone critiquing you, and you having to be open to that critique and being critiqued in front of other people. I mean, I certainly experienced that as a singer, and as a conductor too. I mean, when you're in front of 200 people and you're the one that has to make decisions, and we're only human, so everyone has their own opinions and ideas of whether you're right or wrong. You have to live with that, and you have to kind of navigate your ego, and that's, I think, also why there's a lot of stereotypes about divas and divos, and classical musicians being these really kind of snobby, needy people. Well, there's a reason for that, because we kind of have to use our ego as a wall and an emotional barrier, because it is so hard to just be vulnerable all of the time. And whether it's in educational settings or just pure professional settings where you're the boss, it's still, you're on display all the time, and it's exhausting.
It really is.
I can feel it. Well, you don't
like somber.
I don't feel that there's ego here, so that's good.
Yay!
I was starting to critique your singing, but I'm not going to do that because I don't know anything. You should hear me sing; it's pretty bad. So, like, where is the place to make it? You go to pay all this money for auditions. You give your life for it. Like, where do you have to go? Because I can kind of guess that Ottawa is not the place if you really want to make it.
I'd say the two places are Europe or New York.
And it depends on what you're saying make it.
Right.
Like, if you want to be an opera star, then you have like the Met, but there's lots of other wonderful opera houses around the world. As a conductor, it also depends. Making it depends on what you want to do. For many conductors, they want to work in a university setting, so getting some of these coveted positions at some of the top music schools at U of T, at McGill, down in the States at all the conservatories. That's considered making it. Maybe you love the big symphonic works and you want to be chorus master for these big symphony orchestras. That could be considered making it. Maybe making it for a conductor means that you don't have to have so many puzzle pieces, that you are working for one organization, that you're lucky enough to be able to be paid for a full-time gig with one choir. Like, right? Nice? That's the dream. Like, that's the dream. So there is no one definition of making it, I don't think.
Well, same with arts administrators. Like, arts administrators is actually a pretty broad spectrum that could cover music, visual arts, dance, and theater. My focus is music, specifically choral music. So yeah, it's definitely a very, when I say I'm an arts administrator, it can mean a million things. And that also involves fundraising, development, marketing, like the whole shebang, basically. You're behind the scenes making it happen. It's a huge undertaking, and in fact, arts management jobs are really rare to come by with a good pay, benefits, pension, all that stuff. So if you wanted to make a career of it, you have to keep it up, whether it's on a volunteer basis or you're just taking courses and whatnot, because it's incredibly competitive. So, like, yeah, from a singing standpoint, competitive. From like being a teacher, a professor,
being a manager, it all is competitive.
It's so competitive, and these jobs unfortunately don't pay enough, and so a lot of us have to take on second, third, fourth jobs just to make it all work.
Question about conducting, because
Yeah.
as a normal person, I don't mean that in a bad way, but as a person who's not in the music scene, and I know a little bit about music. I took music in high school, not saying so I know a little bit.
Totally.
But someone who was never interested in any of this music stuff, you're just the person with the pointy stick who waves it around.
I am the person with the pointy stick.
With no rhyme or reason. You're just waving the stick, and look at that, I can be a conductor too. But honestly, I know a little bit about it. But like, what goes into being a conductor besides waving the pointy stick?
Before you get into this, I just have to say conducting is also an art form in itself. It's a whole different beast. So, Deirdre, tell us.
Yeah, that's what I mean, right? Like, everyone just thinks you wave the stick.
It's insane.
Everyone
it's insane.
plays.
I think the best way to describe being a conductor is you wear a huge amount of hats. And so there certainly is that aspect of being the leader, the guide, the facilitator, waving your arms around. To me, the waving my arms around is like the smallest part of my job. And I have spent and continue to spend a large amount of time learning how to do that and finessing it, and making sure that what I'm doing is not for me to make me look fancy or anything, but that all my gestures have meaning to them, so that I am helping all of the singers I work with create music together and be able to collaborate. And I think that is really the role of a conductor in that moment, in rehearsals or in concerts, is that when you have as you know, hundreds of people, or even when it's just 15 to 50, collaboration is hard. We all kind of know that, whether that's being in school and working on group projects or working with our coworkers, collaborating is difficult. And as a conductor, I think what we're primarily doing is helping all of the singers collaborate, and just kind of being that that common thread through it all, helping to make some decisions. And so that's the part that most people see, is the conductor standing in front of everyone. I spend a lot of time by myself prepping the music. It's not bad. I'm an introvert. I like it. That's another thing, is you have to have equal sides introvert and extrovert in you to be a conductor. I spend a lot of time prepping scores because I need to know the score better than anyone in the room. I need to be able to answer questions immediately. Each of the singers has their own line that they need to be able to sing to the best that they can. But I need to know all of those lines and also see the big picture of how it all comes together. When I'm working with an orchestra, I need to know all the orchestra lines. So that's a big undertaking just in itself. And also rehearsal management and rehearsal methodology. Amy's nodding her head because we know what it's like to sit through a horrible 2-3 hour rehearsal where you're just doing the same thing over and over and over and have someone yelling at you, or, you know, it's an art form in itself to be able to lead a workshop, teach a class, lead a rehearsal in a way that everyone is feeling inspired and motivated. So you also have to set aside any shitty day that you've had, any exhaustion that you're feeling, and go in there being positive, ready to motivate and inspire, and then crash at the end of rehearsal.
Yeah.
I think the best feeling for me is when I walk away from a rehearsal and I see all of the singers whistling and laughing and they are excited about the music and they feel like they just had a really productive couple of hours, and I'm exhausted. So that's a really good feeling for me, actually.
I don't know if it's the same feeling, but when I used to be in band class and you'd have like a piece and it would come together and everyone hits their parts. Like you just get this like chill.
Goosebumpy moment. Yeah.
Like, oh my God.
That's the goal. That's the goal.
Do you know that meme where it's like an arm with goosebumps and it says like when the music is good ...
Yeah.
That's exactly what happens.
It was funny. And I mean, that was just something I took in school. And
yeah.
It was funny though. I used to play euphonium.
Nice.
And I could have had a scholarship. But I was like, there's no way I'm going into music. No offense. But I didn't think there was any jobs.
There's not. I dated a tuba player. There's no jobs.
Yeah. I appreciate the $2,000 scholarship or whatever it was. But I'm going to go do radio. No jobs.
Lucrative.
Yeah, exactly. Do you think it's any different being a woman versus a man in this? Reason why I ask is we mentioned the fat lady earlier.
Yeah.
But from what I understand in dating that girl, that no, you are supposed to be in shape and good shoulders and strong chest and do confident.
Yeah.
There's no room for the fat lady in opera. Like it's like acting. Like you need to have a certain body type to be considered successful. I don't know if it's the same for men with that. If there's a certain with them, but do you feel like what's the difference in terms of trying to make it as a career? And
it's like night and day. There was an article I'd like to say it was this year or last year about an opera singer that immensely talented, but she got turned down a role or she got fired because she was, to their standards, overweight. And she did like a huge article on it, and again, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure she sued them, or she
it's so tough because if you go down that road, there's no coming back. Like you either put up with it and try to keep making it, or.
But she definitely raised awareness and trying to get rid of this stigma that I have an image, I have an amazing voice, and to me, it shouldn't matter what I look like. Like I'm going to be wearing costumes anyways and have makeup on, but that shouldn't matter to me. That it's the performance, it's the character I play, and some people can't see past that in opera companies. And even from a conducting standpoint, my good friend Dr. Sarah Brooks did her thesis on gesture. Female composers and gesture, and how some of their gestures can be interpreted a certain way because they're a woman, and how men can do the same gesture and it'll be interpreted differently.
That's like, what do you mean? Like you wave your arm a certain way and they're like,
exactly.
Sorry.
Sorry. It's crazy. Yeah.
I mean, I have so much to say about this topic.
Yeah. You got time.
I mean, it's the two perspectives. Like, because you were bringing it up from the opera perspective, it's a different world. Like going back to when we were talking about social media and audience retention. Like Amy said, you can now go to Cineplex and go see an opera live from the Met. And that means that the way the art of opera used to be, where you were on a stage projecting to hundreds and hundreds of people who are crazy far away from you, that's different now. There are now cameras right on you as if you were acting in a movie. And now opera producers and companies, they're seeing it through that lens and that perspective that people are going to see you up close and personal, and you better be pretty. And, you better be able to fit into these roles of the ingenue and the pretty blonde girl that all the men are trying to pick up. And that in itself leads to a much bigger conversation about the themes found in opera stories and classical music, and opens up a whole other conversation about the power structures between men and women in these types of things.
In history too, right?
And exactly.
17 women were unfortunately not really viewed as people at all back then.
Totally. Currently, what I do primarily for my career is conducting, so I can certainly speak to that. I am super lucky to have surrounded myself by like these crazy badass female conductors for most of my life, and that's been really important to me. When I went to grad school, I made sure that I was studying with a female conductor because I wanted to learn. I wanted to be inspired and figure out how to be a badass bitch on the podium while still being respected.
Yeah, that must be because in my mind, when I think of conductor, and it's like I've only ever seen like old dudes doing it. I've never seen a young woman doing it before. Yeah. Ever.
Well, and I mean, I always come back to this Beyonce quote where she says, I'm not bossy, I'm the boss. Yeah. And that's the thing. One of the organizations I work for right now is almost 80 years old. It's a very long-standing organization. We'll be celebrating our 80th anniversary in a couple of seasons. And I'm the first woman who's ever stood in front of them as an employee, an artistic employee of the organization. It's crazy to think about that, and yet I'm not surprised at all. And it has taken some people a while to get used to. When you're not used to seeing a woman in a place of authority, whether you think you are a feminist or not, whether you theoretically are fine with the idea of a woman telling you what to do, when push comes to shove, and a woman is in a place of authority where you're not expecting to see her in a place of authority, it's really interesting to see people's reactions and the things that they're doing consciously versus unconsciously.
Yeah, it must be the unconscious too, because like people are trying, right? Or good people are trying. Like I always thought my mom was always the alpha growing up. Like I was scared of my mom. Not my dad. And now as work, the three people I report to directly are all women. And I think I don't have weird signs or anything, and there's respect, but I don't know what I do unconsciously.
And that's the thing, right? Like with this organization, I work with wonderful people. You know, the other artistic team are so respectful and supportive. The board I work for is phenomenal. The choristers themselves are great, but it's so interesting to see, you know, sometimes the speaking out of turn or the talking while I'm talking, the correcting things that they would never do with a man there. And I know they're not aware of it. So it's you get frustrated, you get angry, and then you take a step back and you're like, well, there's no use in being angry in this situation. They're not even aware of it. So how can I educate?
Well, yeah, not only are you a woman, you're a young woman.
And
you said there's people in the choir up to 63.
And this particular one is older than that.
That's
so,
what I mean.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
You know, people, I assume, would be like, I've been in music longer than she's been alive, and she's telling me what
absolutely.
to do.
So you're dealing with ageism as well as sexism, for sure.
100%.
Yeah.
Even from a choir manager perspective, when I have to be stern or I would guess when I have to be stern about something, sometimes it can be interpreted as me being just a full-on bitch and intimidating.
Yep.
When all I want to do is just get the point across, because you could say there's like two sides of me. Like when I'm in choir management mode, like I mean business, like there's no dicking around. I need this from you. Can you please make it happen? And I'm counting on you. And I try to be as friendly as I can, but I need them to understand that I'm not trying to be a bitch here. I felt like I've really had to work on them viewing my assertiveness as me just doing my job, and not being a jerk. And I've been in a couple of choirs where I had to work really, really hard to get to that point where they respected me, because before that I felt like I wasn't taken seriously because I was a woman.
Yeah, there's so many assumptions. I mean, when I started
and then I'm young too.
Yeah,
Sorry.
no, exactly. I mean, I'm blonde. When I first started conducting choirs in Ottawa, the amount of times I got the question, so you must be an elementary school music teacher in your day job, right? And I go, no, this is my job. I conduct choirs and I conduct adults. And they go, oh, well, we just assumed you're just so bubbly and happy. And this is a whole, it's a whole kind of cultural shift too in the role of authority. And so many choristers, older choristers, are literally used to being yelled at by men. That is what they expect from a choral conductor, is someone to come in and yell at them that they're doing the wrong thing. And that's not my approach. And I've had to spend a lot of time thinking about who I wanted to be in front of these people, who I wanted to be on the podium. It would be very easy for me to take that approach and to yell, especially trying to force my authority there. But for so many reasons, I don't want to be that type of conductor or that type of person. So how do I show my authority without yelling? Especially when they go, oh, well, she's just so cheerful. She must work with kids. Yeah. I have huge amount of respect for people who work with kids. It is not me. But it's interesting how people's, they make assumptions. Their mind goes there. Yeah.
Do you think, because this all must be like women kind of becoming, I guess, more, as a conductor in the music scene, just talking, that it must only be in the last, I don't know, not even 20 years that this really started to take off? I could be wrong, or was it earlier than that? You can correct me if I'm wrong.
There have been some really phenomenal female conductors I'll stick with Canada, in the Canadian choral scene, who have paved the way for people like me. People like Lydia Adams in Toronto, Diane Loomer in Vancouver, people who have dealt with the worst of this because they were some of the first to be doing it.
So when did they kind of start? I'm trying to get a timeline of when.
Oh gosh, I'm really bad with this kind of stuff.
80s, you can say 80s, 90s, 2000s.
I would say 80s, 90s.
Yeah.
So really we're talking within the last 40 years, it's when women started to take more of a prominent role in
a prominent role.
Yeah.
And we're really lucky in Canada that some of the most prominent, actually I would argue that the vast majority of the most prominent choral conductors are women, because you still have Lydia, you have Elise Bradley with the Toronto Children's Choir, you have Christina Murray with Zara in Nova Scotia, you have Morna Edmondson,
Kathleen
Allen,
yeah.
You have like really...
I love that you know all their names.
Oh my gosh! And the list
yeah.
goes on. Like I'm leaving out so many wonderful, phenomenal conductors because we're so lucky right now to be seeing that happen. In the States, it's significantly different.
Well, yeah, the States is.
America.
In 1920 right now. I don't know what
there's that. In orchestras, it's very different.
Yeah.
There are some really badass, amazing female orchestral conductors. It is definitely much more of a challenge. I think what has made it a little easier in the choral world is there are women's choirs and children's choirs, and you are still getting these fierce, badass women leading these organizations, but it's easier for society to celebrate them when they go, oh, well, they're conducting children's choirs or they're conducting women's choirs. That just makes sense. And not that that's fair, because it takes just as much skill and ability and dedication to doesn't matter who the singers are. But I think it's been a little bit easier for society to swallow that. And that's being pushed. Julia Davids conducts the Canadian Chamber Choir. We had mentioned Kathleen Allen, who is also another young choral conductor who is working with some of the top choirs in Canada. And that, I think, is a little bit more difficult as soon as women are in front of men or male-identifying singers. It just gets incrementally a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
Do you feel the tide's changing a little bit or
Absolutely.
a lot, or, like...
I can feel the tides changing just in Ottawa in the couple of years I've been here conducting. I feel it. It's exciting.
Even at the Podium. So Podium Choral Conference and Festival is a festival held every 2 years. It's a choral conference and festival. So you get a combination of performances from choirs on the national and international platform. And then you also have sessions and seminars. And I see every programming of these conferences growing into more sessions given and performed by women, which I think is amazing. So it's really good to see that they're balancing it out in the right way.
It's funny, I've always associated opera more with women than I did with men. I know there's men opera singers.
Yeah.
But I've always associated more as like a woman singing than a man.
Yeah.
A man, but I guess in the industry, like you guys know much more about it. It's not that. It's not so, I would say.
Well, it's not. I mean, you need men to sing in these shows as well.
Yeah, well, there was one thing growing up that really struck out to me. I went to school with a boy who was into figure skating, and he got teased so much for it that he actually stopped.
Yeah.
And he had crazy talent. And just, I guess, the whole stigma of you're a guy, you don't do stuff like that, like really got to him, and he stopped, and it broke my heart to hear that. Like, he opened up to me once and said, yeah, I really wish I didn't make that decision, but the pressure was so strong, and he wasn't in the right environment of kids for that really affected him. And so I think that kind of streamlines a little bit into the opera world. You get guys that sing, and they think it's not a manly thing, so they stop. And but I feel now like it's definitely pretty well balanced in terms of how many candidates you'll get at competitions. It's pretty well balanced. But
there's two big pieces to this. One is boys tend to stop singing through puberty.
Right.
Which makes sense because they're embarrassed to sing and your voice is cracking and you don't know, you know, as a young boy, you're singing soprano and alto and suddenly you're in tenor or bass territory and you really don't know how to navigate that. It's difficult. And now you are seeing choral conductors who adamantly keep these boys singing. And even girls are going through changes with their vocal cords through puberty. It's just less of a distinct change. But there are all these wonderful children's choir conductors who are doing the work to learn how to help these kids walk through this awkward time and still keep singing. So you would see a lot of boys drop out of choirs and drop out of singing and never get back into it. And that's been part of it. And of course the other one is just the decline of music education in school systems in general.
So sad.
It's awful. And it's hard because in choirs you will see so many more sopranos and altos than you will tenors and basses. And those are the two things it boils down to, is boys not continuing to sing after childhood and the music education system not being there to teach them.
I think it's such an important piece to everything. You can apply, and not just music, though it is important, but all sorts of art, because it gives you, it almost helps you think of things differently. I find, at least, like learning music and watching how things came together, the practice, like it teaches so many other skills that I applied to sports, or I applied
Yes.
to
Yep.
applied to learning, or even now, like I look back on my appreciation for music, and it helped me. I almost think it made me empathize with people a little bit better.
Absolutely. Yes.
I know going through my teens, music I really felt was the only thing that was there for me. I know a lot of people
Yeah.
feel that way too. And, you know, you hear the lyrics and it's almost like they were writing to you.
Absolutely.
You know, I look back at people like Corey Taylor or Chester Bennington and the things they wrote on paper. I'm like, that is what I'm feeling.
That's what I'm feeling. This is me.
like-
Especially in your angsty teenage
Yeah,
years.
right?
Yes.
Like, you don't know what's going on, all these changes, all these feelings. It's just like, that's what I feel. And it's almost like
Find a post.
they're taking it away from people and not having that same appreciation. And not that I'm against top 40 music, but one of the things I find most troubling about it is it's empty. To me, it doesn't invoke feeling or passion. Sure, it makes me feel good. It makes you fist bump or rage or
Yeah.
something like that.
Which, going back to classical music, is why I would love to see more people appreciate classical music with context. And it's our jobs as arts administrators and as artists to put the context in place. It's not the job of the audience to understand context. But if the context is in place, then it goes back to those goosebumpy moments. It goes back to the I'm feeling angsty or melancholy and I just want to feel things, and it lets you feel those things.
Yes.
Yeah, but and I don't know what it is about our curriculum or the people in charge, but taking all that away, and not just music, like I said, like art, like
Absolutely.
painting.
Yep.
People find
All the same.
drawing or art or whatever else things it is. that
Visual
people are gonna
arts,
take that.
dance.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, dance is like even more or less so relevant, I find. Like you start as a little kid and you're like, yeah, I love dance, and then everyone just kind of moves away from it when you get older.
Yeah.
Did you find that post?
I'm actually looking for something else. So I have a blog called Blonde in the Choir.
Oh, nice plug.
And
Time for plugs.
And I wrote a post some years ago about popular music for classical musicians, my recommendations. And before I elaborated on this topic, I asked people on Facebook, what are your views of popular music and classical music? And someone described this in the most perfect way. But of course, this is not catered to everyone, but this is what he says. It's all part of a complete musical diet. Brahms, Schubert, Debussy, and Bach are like the meat, potato, veggies, flavors, and spices that sustain my brain, heart, body, and soul. And then we have Kesha, Kanye, Beyonce that act as the ice cream, junk food, beer, and pizza. These guilty pleasures are also very important in helping us express our humanity and can be very enjoyable. But as for me, I think it's healthier to experience them in moderation. Interesting,
that.
eh?
I would jump in and say that an artist like Beyonce is just as much of meat and potatoes than the Brahms and Beethoven.
And
however,
yeah,
yes.
and this is just a quote from someone off Facebook, and
But it's good. That's a good.
it's an interesting analogy. Of course, people will disagree with that, but when
People
I
are
read that,
tweeting
I'm
right
like, yeah, but like in a very general sense,
Yeah.
it makes.
Where
it
would you
makes
think
sense.
things like hip hop or metal fall into? Because those are. I mean, it's funny, but to me, and I'm talking about like '90s rap, or not the mumble rap they call it today, but
Yeah,
to me, both of those are both like poetry, and
Yes.
they really go
Yes.
through and tell a story.
it's forms of expression.
Yeah, where, like I said, like I find the new stuff, not all of it, obviously,
Yeah.
but the bangers usually are just like shake your ass on the floor,
I know.
like drinks up high.
You've got to remember that in every era, in every decade in the past century, in every era of music, there's always been that.
Mozart was never saying put your booty on the floor.
Oh no! But
Sure,
at
he
the
thought about
time,
it.
Mozart was so prolific, but so much of what he was writing, he was being paid to write, and he would write in 5 minutes in his sleep.
Okay.
And I am sure he's not rolling in his grave for me to say that a lot of it at the time was considered this like light, fluffy, easy stuff. Now he certainly wrote masterpieces, and so much of his output is like that. But fluff, quote unquote, is not something that is new in the 21st century. It is not something that is specific to 2018. It has always been there. That's just an overarching umbrella comment to make. But you should comment on the other styles.
Yeah,
It's funny because I see you're always at like metal concerts with like these big
I'm
guys with beards and
I'm that weird classical metal hybrid that you will meet.
Not to jump in, but a lot of female metal singers, I think, come from operatic backgrounds.
Yes,
right?
sir.
Yes.
Nightwish, Unleash the Archers, Arch Enemy. Yeah, they all stem from classical training. A specific genre of metal that's pretty popular with that is power metal or doom metal. Doom metal is a lot more like, not background noise, but it's not the big belty sound. It's like, it's more a little bit. Yeah.
Well, I know Serge Tankin and Bruce Dickinson also came from operatic backgrounds, so there must be some sort of correlation in the
it all relates. And I say this, I've said it before and I say it again, it all roots back to the top tens in classical music. It all roots back to where it all originated from. It's all a product of how it all started. And so everyone just expresses it in a different style, in a different way. Now, my involvement in the metal community is, I love it for so many reasons. One, it can be just as technical as classical music. Metal has an endless amount of subgenres. They have thrash metal, prog metal, they have math metal, which is as technical as it can get. It's incredible. And I love how different the audiences are. You could go to a choir concert, sit in a pew, be engaged in a very different way. And then you go to a metal show and you could have like the shittiest day of your life, go to a metal show and just like headbang it out or go in the mosh pit. You don't have to, but and just let all that energy out.
Mosh pit.
Yeah.
I just went in one this summer for the first time in a couple of years, and
Me too.
I was like, wow. And I thought I was in shape. I go to the gym, I do some push-ups, but I was like, woo! Okay.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And there's so many misconceptions about the metal community. Everyone thinks we're Satanists. Everyone thinks
it's the nicest thing ever.
They are the nicest people I've ever met.
Like, I remember I was at a heavy MTL in Montreal back when it was a little bit bigger. And I think it was In Flames I was seeing. And I was in the mosh pit. And someone's sunglasses got knocked off. And everyone, stopped it. Whoa!
Stop what you're doing!
Everyone, they picked it up. You good? You good? Okay, go! And then re-engages.
Everyone is there for each other. You're going to get, like, the odd asshole that is too drunk and just wants to wreak havoc. And that is not tolerated. Like, they will take you out. But yeah, everyone is so nice to each other. We're all there for the same goal, is to just enjoy the music in front of us. If you want to punch the air, if you want to kick the air, if you want to push people, as long as like they're cool with it, go for it. It's so freeing. Yet you can also stand at the back and just like headbang and close your eyes and just let it all sink in. It's a completely different dynamic in audience, and I love getting a mix of both. It's incredibly fulfilling to me. I love seeing both sides, and I think that's why like audience engagement is such a huge thing for me. And yeah, like you said in the mosh pit, everyone is there for each other. Yeah, there's nothing negative that there are some negative things I can say about the metal community, but like the positives outweigh the negatives.
Yeah, it's always when the women are crowd surfing and the fingers going up, and you're like, man, why?
Yeah, I know. I know.
Yeah,
I know. Yeah, but it's also like the metal community is definitely more male dominated. So when you do walk into a music venue at a metal show and you're one of the 5 girls there, you definitely feel exposed in a way. And like I have bright silver hair, so I definitely pop more than most people. Like a lot of the girls there will usually have like dark raven hair, and I'm here like and
a lot of the men I found at least are introverts and they don't
Yeah.
talk to a lot of women and
Yeah,
so.
they just kind of like stare, but they try not to be creepy about it. But they are still some of the nicest people. So I had to get used to that when I first started going back. There was a while that I kind of stepped back from the metal scene, relationships and everything, and you know, sometimes when you're in relationships, you have to make sacrifices in order
Music's
to
never
find a
one of
middle
them.
ground.
Music's never one of them.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the circumstances, it just kind of worked at the time. And then when that relationship ended, I found myself again, and it was absolutely wonderful. So getting back into that and not really knowing anyone in the metal community, it was really scary. I would stand by myself most of the time at shows, and then I started seeing the same people at every show because it's a very thriving community, but it's also very small. So it's pretty easy to get to know some of the people that are there, and they're all incredibly welcoming. It's the age gap is also very interesting. So I am no longer in my 20s. And so going to a metal show, you see a lot of the girls there that are quite young. And it's as if like they get out of their metal phase by the time they're like 23. So like there's me, and then there's some of these young girls, but they are just as awesome. And a lot of people ask me like, aren't you kind of old for that scene? I'm like, no, man, because the guys are like my age usually, and it's just the girls that are super young, but everyone is just there for the same goal, to just have a good time. And yeah, I love it. I love having the two dynamics. It's incredibly fulfilling to me.
Are you also a metalhead?
I'm not
D?
a metalhead. No.
But you don't
No.
just listen to classical all the time.
I very rarely listen to classical music, actually.
Because that's more like work, right?
It is. Yeah. Actually, when I was in high school, I always knew that I was going to go into music. I was one of those kids that like started playing piano when they were 4, and it was always obvious what I was going to do. And my high school piano teacher went, now, you know, now that you like are going to go to music school, silence is going to become very valuable, and music is not going to mean the same thing to you as it used to. And yeah, damn, he was very right. Yeah, so I very rarely listen to classical music. I listen to a lot of like Canadian folk. I listen to a lot of hip hop.
Nice.
So one of my favorite things about music is like you can never define somebody. Like you can never just look at somebody and be like, this is the taste of music you have.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally.
Right? Like I would never been like, you're a hip hop
Yeah,
person.
right?
I never would have
Yeah.
been like, you're a metal person. Most people look at me and they're like, you're just some white guy who enjoys.
Top 40.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, not at all.
You're wrong.
It's just like one of my favorite things. It's just like, oh, you like hip hop? Okay. Like getting
Yeah.
down in the car.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Totally.
Oh, I love
Yep.
that stuff. Yeah. And a lot of people ask me, like, what kind of music do you like? It's mostly on Tinder. They ask me that. And I'm like, honestly, it's
everything.
It's literally everything. I appreciate everything. I'll have days where I listen to just rap. Other days I'll listen to musicals. Other days metal. And it changes all the time because I don't have a favorite. I focus on 2 genres mostly, but everything else, like, I love and appreciate it all because it all comes from the same place.
super deep. I love it.
I'm a deep and no, I'm not interesting. I'm a very deep person and throws people off sometimes, which I kind of.
Do you think it's to
I
do
love
with
it.
the music at all? Like it makes you more introspective, and like you said, Dee, that it exposing yourself, making yourself vulnerable. Do you does music do that? I don't know. I also like to think of myself as like a kind of a deeper thinker.
Yeah.
This is why it's so upsetting that music education is being cut from school curriculums. It is proven that the skills that you get from music are completely transferable to sports, to math, to science, to all of those things.
Oh, yeah.
But it is also empathy, self-awareness, not just connecting with your emotions, but navigating them, being able to address how you're feeling. There's a reason why music therapy is so successful. There's a reason that using music with autistic kids is so successful. There's a reason when people have anger management issues that it's so successful, because it helps you navigate your emotions. And yeah, I think that in 21st century, with so much of the societal and emotional crap that we have to wade through, to be taking music out of the core curriculum and putting nothing in its place when it comes to emotions and dealing with your emotions is just so upsetting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There is a lot of crap going on, though.
Yeah, there sure is.
What in particular do you find yourself paying attention to the most? You can answer that, either one of you.
All the crap of the world, jeez.
I mean, there's so much going on. There's so much to know.
It's so overwhelming.
There's not only, the stating the obvious is I'm a man and you're women. The gender
imbalance.
Imbalance, and the kind of the clash going on right now between both. There's I had my brother on in the first podcast who shed some light on the LGBTQ community, learning a little bit about that. But there's also, just that's the cultural war that's going on in our society. But there's, North Korea and Russia and my God, Donald Trump and the Kavanaugh thing. And that's only one of so many stories in the Bill Cosby just got convicted. The sexual assault.
This is a huge thing that's being unearthed in the classical music realm too, is sexual assaults.
Really?
And I mean, one of my favorite Canadian conductors in the past couple of years, the stories started flooding about, his sexual assaults, and it kills you when you're in a community, in a small community that you feel is safe, and it's your family, it just sucks.
Yeah, it sucks to see that,
and it's everywhere. No one's safe. Yeah. No community is safe. It permeates everything.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm pulling up the not to steer the conversation. I'm pulling up the National Choral Census that was curated by Choral Canada, and it's got a whole bunch of fun facts about choir music. But we can discuss that later if you want.
What are the fun facts?
Some fun facts. We've got.
Are they actually fun?
They're actually kind of cool.
I think so.
Yeah. There's a choral singer in 1 in 6 households. What's the one about hockey?
I thought that was going to go a lot deeper. You're just whipping it out as we're talking about sexual assault.
Good timing.
Not yet. Yeah, I know. My segue is awful. Where's the one with hockey? Okay. Choral singing. 3.5 million Canadians sing in choirs. Would be the largest city in Canada, 27% larger than the population of Toronto. There are 50% more adult choral singers than hockey players.
Canada's national pastime is choir
singing.
It sure is.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah, I thought it would, share that with you guys. But yeah, you can just search the National Choral Census and it's got all those facts on there. And it was just released, I think, a year ago. So that would actually be something really cool to share, going back to how we expose this information to
just how accessible the choir
just to show
is.
It's all around you, you just don't really know it.
I just need more people talking about it. I admit that I only really went because I was pursuing that one woman. I haven't been since. But now that I know you two, stop by.
That would be awesome. But yeah, it's there are a lot of instances, going back to the whole Kavanaugh, oh my God.
Segue back.
I know. I got to keep the focus.
Is it bad?
Yeah. I think I just when I read her speech, I was just
who, Dr. Ford's?
Yeah.
Is that what we're talking about?
Even another segue, because I was talking about, is it bad in the music community?
Oh.
Obviously, yes, it's bad.
Obviously.
Kavanaugh.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
In the music community, yeah.
Interesting.
I'm sleep deprived, sorry.
I think, as much as I have gotten upset over conductors that I admire, allegations coming out about them, I've personally been lucky enough that in my circle of choirs that I'm associated with, nothing like that has come out.
Me too.
But I think I would be really naive. It would be really naive of me to think that it will never. Like, we're living in a really fascinating time in history. It may not be a great time in history, but it's a fascinating time in history. And I think that it's a painful process, but it, you know, seeing how the whole Kavanaugh thing went down is really frustrating and disheartening. But at the same time, you know, there's been all of these comparisons to Dr. Ford to Anita Hill and Anita Hill's allegations back in the 90s and talking about how then in the early 90s there was just this huge influx of females in these positions of power that came out of that. And I think that's an important thing to remember. It's what I tell myself too on days that I'm dealing with ageism and sexism. Not that it's as heavy as dealing with sexual assault, but just that it sucks in the moment. But I see it getting better. That I'm sure that the female conductors who came before me, I can't imagine how hard it was for them, but I'm so thankful for them because it paved the way for me to be able to be in this career. So I think that looking at people like Anita Hill, looking at people like Dr. Ford, and going, yeah, like I can't imagine how difficult it was to come forward and do those things. But how wonderful is it that they are paving the way for things to get better in the future?
One of the best quotes I saw on the internet about this whole situation is, it was like, whether Kavanaugh did or did not sexually assault her, or these stories are true or false, that the fact that this all came to light during a job interview, because this was we forget that this was not a court case. This was essentially it was a job interview for him, and that the antics, you know, him yelling, some of his answers, the controversy.
Who the fuck does that in a job interview?
It's like, you know, if I'm in a job interview and you're like, "Hey, Ryan, so have you ever sexually assaulted anyone?" I'd be like, "Whoa!" Then like yelling,
like very defensive.
Whoa, okay, you know, like the fact that, and even the interesting thing I find is people I follow that kind of, I would guess you could say, are controversial intellectuals, or even kind of like, just based on that one idea that like he should step down morally because, especially for the Supreme Court, like you want someone who's like just and kind of doesn't have baggage. Whether, I think now with social media, that's going to be so much harder for everybody, no matter who you are, to not have some sort of backstory or baggage or some stupid thing you did when you were an early adult.
It's true.
You know, like it's to have even like the president of the United States or a world leader to be perfectly squeaky clean. Everyone's going to know about it now.
Oh yeah, all the dirty laundry.
Yeah, it's gonna. It I love it. I don't love it, but it's a quote that that it's such a crazy time. With social media, and you just know so much more about everybody than anyone ever did.
Skeletons
before.
in the closet. Oh yeah, no such thing anymore.
I see my Facebook memories pop up. I'm like, Brian, why did you post that?
Right? I know, delete. Yeah.
I saw a post from 2007 where I said Amy is a macadamian, and I'm like, what the hell? What was I thinking? It's the most random thing ever. But yeah, like going back to the whole like Kavanaugh case, I try to find the silver lining in every situation like that. While the vote, I believe the vote went ahead, right? Or they delayed it by a week, I think.
So I don't know if the confirmation has happened. But two of the people who were wavering, two of the senators, yesterday said that they would vote to confirm him.
So it's all but assured. Yeah, I think it was supposed to be this morning. So
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, so watching her speech, I mean, I think every person, man or woman, that has experienced sexual assault or an awful experience similar to that, was there with her. They felt like they were there with her and were reflecting on their own experiences, whether it was a month or 10 or 50 years ago. I felt there with her. And I have my own story that I do not want to share, but I really felt like I am with you and I believe you. I mean, you take a look at, I mean, I guess image is not important in this case, but she is an established woman, an educated woman. Why would she potentially ruin everything, coming forward with this, and people think she's making, I could not believe in some of the comments that people thought she was making it up. I thought that is awful that you would assume that. Why would a woman who has a career and everything and just potentially jeopardize that with this made up story? I cannot believe that you would assume she's making this up. Like, she put everything at risk.
Yeah.
Why would someone do that?
Yeah.
Unless they're like batshit crazy, but that is really rare cases.
You're right.
Yeah.
It is rare. There was a graphic going around, and it was like the amount of people who actually, out of 100 women, it was like 0.2% actually make it up.
Yeah.
It's fun. It's not funny. That's not the term I want to use. But like I kind of trying to walk the line where I don't want to discredit a woman ever coming forward with her story. But I also want to have some sort of presumption of innocence as well. The thing I want is, like, let's not focus so much on this social media the mob mentality, the outrage. Let's focus that energy, that passion, that anger on fixing the system, so we can actually achieve justice, that we don't have to literally eviscerate victims of rape and sexual assault and like destroy their lives just to try to get a conviction.
I mean, how amazing would it have been if, instead of screaming and yelling about his own innocence, Kavanaugh had screamed and yelled about the work that the United States has to do in supporting sexual assault survivors, and, you know, name dropped a ton of organizations that have had their funding taken away in the past few years that need to have their funding back. And, you know, I think that we do focus a lot on the whole concept of blame and innocence, and I agree that it just needs to be like a turnover of energy, and where that energy goes and what we actually talk about.
Yeah. Well, here's a question. If you don't want to answer, that's fine. But say Kavanaugh came on and was like, look, I made a really shitty mistake when I was a teenager, and I've been living with it every day. I did do what she said. I'm incredibly sorry. I was young, I was drinking, I was stupid, but I did it. Like, he owned it. He sounded sincere. What do you think the reaction would be from, you know, you as women, who I'm sure, and it's one of the saddest things now that I'm learning, is that when I meet a woman or I have a woman friend, that they probably have a story.
Oh,
and
yes.
that makes me incredibly sad.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so many men as well.
I don't
like there's just so many.
I know men do experience it, but I personally don't like to use that. Will men also experience it?
Well, it's not just the men also, but I think that is an important step forward, that instead of segregating, and I mean, I've already talked about the whole feminism and being a female in these minority career paths and things. Like, I am a staunch feminist. However, I think that it is important to be universal in these situations and be like, hey, the way forward is to acknowledge that people are experiencing this, and maybe it's not the perfect way forward or perspective, but maybe it would be a helpful perspective. I don't know.
It's tricky, right? I would really like to see a point where men and women aren't fighting each other. The way I look at it, I'm like, people, and this is my conspiracy mind thinking, but it's like the people at the top, Trump, for example, is creating this divisiveness between men and women, and, you know, black versus white, trans versus gay versus women, that they want us all to fight each other instead of fighting them, right?
Yeah.
That's the way I look at it. Like, why are we trying to fight each other when, you know, we look at people in power making these awful decisions?
Yeah.
In my mind, they're awful decisions, not to everybody.
But even then, like, why don't we fight for something instead of fighting against something and against each other? And I think that's what I mean, coming back to sexual assault survivors and you know, taking gender out of it a little bit is not to diminish the power of female voices, because of course, you know, it needs to come from female voices, this movement that we're seeing starting to happen. But you know, it comes back to the blame idea. Like, we're always going to find someone to blame. The government is made up of humans. I don't know whether you want to consider some of the people in government right now human or not, but let's you know, shift the energy towards something positive. Let's fight for better awareness, and let's fight for education, and let's fight for sex ed and consent ed, and you know, that coming back around to music and music education, I mean, that's what I'm doing, whether I'm doing a workshop with high school students or whether I'm working with adults, is let's not focus on all of the shitty things happening and sing in spite of that. Let's focus on the good that's coming out of it and sing for that. It's, you know, perspective, right?
Yeah. I just find there's way too much people who want to just sit there and fight on the internet and contradict things they say or act like hypocritical about things.
Yeah, just being trolls.
Not even troll. Like, so there's a lot of people that I see that are. I generally believe they believe they're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
So one example I'll use, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, is there was a Twitter account. I can't remember what it was. It was a feminist account, and it was during this Kavanaugh thing, and she was like, men need to come forward and take down other men when this stuff happens. Okay, so I see this retweeted, so I go and look down, scrolling through her timeline. I look at it. Men have one of the tweets, and I'm paraphrasing. This isn't a quote. I should find it, but it was like, men have no right to comment on anything that involves sexual assault or violence because something about the patriarchy like creates this thing. So in one tweet, she wants men to come forward and help, which is, I agree, men, if they notice things going on, they should. But then at the same time, she doesn't want men to comment on it because she's trying to fight against men, right? Because men are creating this system and they're the ones who are mostly assaulting. So as a man, do I want to jump in with her and then her call me up being like, you're a man, don't do this? So I think the majority of people who are just looking at it are just like, I'm just going to step back
Stuck
because
between a rock and a hard
I
place.
don't want to get involved or be called out or people and that divisiveness of people fighting, whatever the issue is you're starting to alienate other people who might be on your team or might help. Whatever.
Yeah.
I'm not even talking just gender. It's all sorts of different issues. But it's the one thing, like it's teams. It's feminism doesn't have to be a team versus men, and just men doesn't have to be a team against women or the LGBT doesn't have to be. You know, we don't have to be on these different teams fighting each other. That's the whole thing I want. I want to, that's this part of this podcast. I want to learn about what other people are going through and see it through your lens.
Yeah.
So I can help better, you know, create my lens to see things from so many different points of view.
Yeah, I think you're really hitting the nail on the head when it comes to teams and kind of segregating things. And I'm queer, so when you're talking about like the LGBTQ versus non, I mean, that's something that in the queer community you see a lot of argument over allies and should allies participate in pride parades and what does it mean to be an ally and things like that. And I think we get into this headspace that everything is black or white, that if you are a left-wing person, that there's a certain way to be left, or if you're a right-wing person, there's a certain way to be right. And
then it just keeps going.
It keeps going.
That's the biggest thing, right? I saw one a tweet. It was like, "White feminists, what are you doing to acknowledge your privilege?" And I was kind of like, why are you segregating feminism into different classes, right? Like,
Yeah.
we all, like, if you're a feminist, you're a feminist, not I'm more feminist than you because you're more privileged than me. I'm thinking out loud, and I understand that, like, minorities and women, like, as a white guy, like, I understand that I'm in power and have not myself but my class of person, I guess you could say, and I understand that. So I understand that people have to band together to try to take down or fix, or you know what I mean. I just find it so interesting that, like, why are you trying to alienate another person who's fighting for the same thing as you? Like,
yeah, I mean, intersectionality is really important. Whether you're, whatever lens perspective you're seeing through, whether you're talking about queer issues and queer justice, you need to be intersectional. Whether you're talking about feminism, you need to be intersectional. That's not a conversation we see enough of in our fields, I don't think. And so I think this is, it's a difficult area to walk through because on the one hand, talking about not having an us versus them kind of conversation going on, but part of getting away from that us versus them is talking about inclusivity and intersectionality, and everyone acknowledging where they land on the privilege scale, and being aware of it, and being vocal about how they can help, how they can use their privilege in whatever way they have privilege to work and to create platforms for other people without that particular privilege. And it means it is really tricky when you're hearing things being called out saying, men, we want to hear from you, but we don't want to hear from you, and where you should be putting your voice and where you need to be not putting your voice to allow for other voices to be heard.
I guess that's
right?
the main thing, right? Not putting my voice in a place where it doesn't have a place, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I don't have a place to.
Yeah.
I mean, I just try to support my friends and my community. I can't do anything really about the larger scale of things.
I think that's how I try to look at things, like programming music, going back to kind of my bread and butter in life, is my position of privilege as a conductor is I get to choose whose voices are heard, and what music is heard, and within that music, the message. And as conductors, sometimes it's really easy just to focus on, okay, well, let's focus on the artistic side of things. What are the keys that are going to flow together nicely, the different tempos and moods, and don't really think about, okay, well, who wrote this? How many female conductors, or female composers rather, am I programming? How many composers who are people of color? How many non-binary and trans composers? Not a lot of conductors take that into consideration. And that's what I try to think about. That's how I try to acknowledge my privilege. And that's the way that I can raise up other people's voices. And I think that's tricky, is figuring out, okay, well, how do I do that? How do I acknowledge my privilege, raise up other people's voices? How can I, like an everyday person, do that? What's my method?
I like how you just use the analogy of music for society and having a conductor of society, of life. There's a conductor of life. I love that. One of the just side points is just people who want to be progressive, or who have progressive ideas, are spending so much time fighting each other. They're not actually fighting people on the right. So people, so when I left or right, like, people on the right just watch them fight, and they're like, oh, okay, like, we're just gonna go do our thing over now, right? Like, Just needs to be some unity.
Have you seen any episodes of Queer Eye?
I watched all of them.
Okay, so then you know that one of the big things that has come out of this revamp of this show is these gay guys walking into southern states with Trump signs on the lawn and being kind to them and having difficult conversations. And I love that, and I think it's so timely that you know we are always fighting within the left side of things. We're fighting each other. We're then looking at people on the right or anywhere righter than us, and fighting. And that's
the thing. It's fighting. It's outrage and social media. These are not the two platforms we need to be having these discussions. You need to be just go in and be kind. Look, I'm just a normal person. I have a different sexual preference than you, but like I'm nice.
Find your ways to use your privilege to raise up other people's voices. Do your work. Educate yourself. Don't make people of color, trans people, non-binary people, queer people, like don't make them do the work for you. But at the same time, just be kind. I totally agree.
That's my thing. I try to take care of what I can take care of. Just be nice to the people around me, nice to people who meet me. And then hopefully they carry on what I did to them to somebody else. And hopefully it's just because I understand, like, because I'm a white male, like I really don't see people for their skin color or sexual orientation or gender, whatever it is, like I understand, like because I'm coming it from the top. I'm not coming from the bottom, so I get that part. But like, I've marched in a whole bunch of pride parades. I've been to drag shows. I've been to sporting events. I've been to hip hop. Like, you know what I mean? Because I just don't see it. I just I like these things and they're fun, and you know, I'm just gonna be nice to everyone around me. So.
I find it interesting how you're saying like social media is not a good platform for
I specifically do not comment on anything because it does nothing.
Yeah.
You're never going to change someone's mind on social media. Be like, that was a really good post.
But, and again, I try to find the silver lining in everything. But for me, I don't comment on those things as well. But I also like to learn from them. I learn a lot of world issues through social media. Yeah. And it helped me formulate my own opinion on it. I see like the bad stuff, I see the good stuff, and I'm like,
just don't read the comments.
Yeah. But even some of the comments, like people raise like really good points, and then others are just like plain assholes, and I'm like, okay, you're a dick, and I don't agree with that. So it helps me kind of formulate my own opinion of it. Like I don't let it influence me too much, because I'm one of those people that I take this information, I really give it a think and how I feel about it. But I still don't comment on it.
It's just important for everybody just to see both sides of the argument.
And that's incredibly important to me.
And unfortunately, we don't have a government system that is a middle, right? It's either your vote left or right, Democrat or Republican or liberal or conservative. Like, you don't just have like kind of like level-headed people who are just like, we're just going to make things good. Everything has, and it always has to be polarizing. Everything has to be polarizing. You have to be, you know, I love one of the quotes, and I don't know if I mentioned it earlier. It's been a long time actually. But it was like, if you get like 100 people in a room, 100% chances that at least one of them is going to be an idiot or an asshole. So when you get 1 million people, you're going to get 1,000 people who are like that, right? So you have all sorts, and that's the people you usually hear from. You don't hear from the people who are just having a good, honest chat at the bar, like a philosophical discussion. You hear the person on social media who's either being super racist or super, you know, bigotry, or someone who's being super progressive, making these comments that I was referring to. Like you get, but everyone else is just, I like to assume like us, where we're just like, okay, like let's try to make things better, and how can we help? And
and it all depends on like how we process things and how our own experiences have been affected by that, right?
It's so complex, and that's why
complex.
I truly, unfortunately, believe we'll never have like a utopian society where everyone's hunky dory getting along, because too many people think too many different ways, and you're never
Yeah.
like, my hope is that people just have compassion and just be kind and be
Yeah.
nice and help people who are in need. But there's just, whether it's mental illness or your experience, it truly affects on how you grow up and how you see things. And unfortunately, just there are some not good people in this world, whether it's because of something or because that's just who they are. That will never. There's so many people that, unfortunately, there's always going to be a small percentage of the world that sucks.
Yeah.
That sucks.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like my idea of a utopian goal is kind of like what we're doing, is just raising awareness on all these things coming to light, and helping people overcome their ignorance of certain topics. Like, before commenting, really just kind of look into it, and instead of having like a really awful comment just kind of be the be all end all. Okay, this is what's happening. Like, I want people to overcome their ignorance and really just kind of think about it and not be too quick to judge.
Yeah, I think that's a great closing point. Thank you guys for coming in.
Thank
Really
you so
appreciate
much.
it. We went an hour and 50 minutes.
50?
50. It's almost 2 hours. Goes by fast. I always
Yeah.
love it. We'll start with you, Dee. Where can people find you? Where can they follow you? Do you have any shows coming up that people in Ottawa would love to see?
Yeah, I am really lucky to work for some really fabulous choral organizations. But instead of shouting out my particular ones, I would just say go find a choir. Any choir. A good place to start is going to CAMAC, CAMMAC, CAMAC Ottawa Gatineau. They are the go-to for what's kind of going on in all the different choirs in the city. Go check out a show at the NAC. And just kind of get involved and get your feet wet. And there's all types of different styles of music, and come support us artists.
Amy?
You can find
Look
me.
at that. You got your schedule out.
Yeah, I'm trying just to remember all my handles. Oh god. So on Instagram you can find me at Blonde in the Choir, all one word. I am in 2 choirs, Capital Chamber Choir. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, as well as Isla, which is a women's choir. It's AELLA. And Twitter, I think I'm under Mamie D. But I'm never really on there. So just find me on Instagram, guys.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. What a lovely conversation.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.